Welcome to Pieces for My Puzzle. I'm your host, Nikki Shipp, and I'm excited to be sharing with you my life with a son on the spectrum. This podcast is for anyone who is looking for quick tips and perspective, but most of all, for hope and inspiration. So sit back, relax, and let's put the pieces together. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Pieces for My Puzzle. I'm your host, Nikki Shipp. I hope everyone's having a fantastic week. Last week, we talked about ways to cultivate friendships with your kiddo on the spectrum. But this week, I'm especially excited because we have a great topic. We are going to be speaking with Chris and Autumn Timmins, the founders of a nonprofit called Preston's Pursuit for Acceptance. And they are working on bridging the gap between first responders and autism awareness. Let me tell you a little bit about them first before I fully welcome them to the show. At the heart of Preston's Pursuit for Acceptance is a personal journey between Chris and Autumn. They have they're adoptive parents of a son, Preston, who is now 17 years old and is on the autism spectrum. Chris has 25 years of experience in law enforcement, and both of them have devoted themselves to reshaping the inclusivity of emergency response. Their commitment stems from a desire to foster a culture of knowledge, acceptance, and inclusion of individuals with autism within the first responder community. Preston has taught Chris and Autumn a lot about the value of slowing down to understand that everyone has different needs and responses, especially when they are in distress. At the heart of their nonprofit is a true desire for everyone, including those who are on the autism spectrum, to get help when they need it the most. Every encounter is an opportunity to make a meaningful impact and create trust within the community. Through their experience as parents and being a first responder family, Chris and Autumn are leading the charge on helping our heroes protect and serve everyone in their community. So, Chris and Autumn, thank you so much for being here today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. We're excited.
I'm excited too. Just to give our listeners a little bit of background, I personally have known Chris and Autumn for several years, and I've been chomping at the bit to have them on the show. So I'm glad that we finally were able to make it happen. I just kind of want to jump in just to familiarize our listeners, those that are listening today. Tell us a little bit about you guys in Preston.
Go ahead.
We became adoptive parents of Preston when he was 1 week old, and we began that journey learning very quickly that there was something different and realizing that we needed to start the assessment process. And we started that process, learning very quickly that he had some special needs. Mm-hmm. And so by about 4 years old, we learned about, ADHD, sensory processing disorder. There was this laundry list that was given to us.
All the secondary things, right?
Yes.
It's not just
yes.
autism spectrum disorder. There's always something else. Right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Mm-hmm. And I remember, feeling like, what do I do? Where do I go from here? And, feeling really lost and ill-equipped. Mm-hmm. And feeling like I needed more support. I needed more guidance. And it wasn't enough. And so I went further, and I went and got another assessment done for him. And that's when we learned that, you put that whole mixed bag of diagnoses together, and it's autism, along with ADHD and what have you. But moving forward, I learned, that this was not going to define him. And we were going to take this and support him, mm-hmm. guide him, and he was still going to be successful in everything he was going to do. At least that was how I felt.
In your mind, right?
Yeah. And so that's where I've been from there on out. And, but also being law enforcement family, we've, had a lot that, we've lived by. And
and that's kind of what led into Preston's pursuit, right?
Exactly. So, living the world of being a law enforcement family, but also, special needs parents, we've seen that need for support, not only for the autism community, but also for the first responder community, and seeing that need to bridge that gap. And so hence the reason we felt the need to create this nonprofit, because we see that there needed to be more tools in their tool belt for first responders.
Yeah.
And we saw that they wanted that too. It wasn't just us saying they should have this, because our first responders they have families, and they want this, and they need resources too. They need support as well. Right. So that's kind of where we were coming from.
And I can 100% understand, because you guys know we're also a law enforcement family, and so this was always kind of a point of concern for us too.
Right.
In general, like I even law enforcement aside, I always was worried, like, how would people respond to Drayson? How will they understand that maybe he has a language barrier, or he doesn't communicate the way that maybe, quote unquote, normal people communicate? And I think that that's always an underlining fear. But, the one thing that I think people don't think about is emergency response.
Exactly.
And the only reason why it came to our minds was because we're, a first responder family.
Yeah.
So was there, and I know we've spoken about this before, but just to, for our listeners, like, what was the pivotal moment that you guys decided to formulate Preston's Pursuit? Like, what was the, like, that's it, we're going to do this?
So I would say in 2017, for us, there was an incident in Buckeye, Arizona, where an officer who was a drug recognition expert, so usually those officers get real specified training on, what stimulants will do, or what, alcohol does, or different types of illegal substances, or just even prescribed substances could do to a body, and how a person's mannerisms will act. So, and being a former DUI enforcement officer myself, having a lot of those trainings, we also have an ability when we're doing evaluations to say this is a medical rule out. So whatever we're seeing isn't medication induced or illegal substance induced. So you would anticipate this officer would have, some of that training to be able to kind of come in and identify these things. But what ended up happening is that officer contacts this 14-year-old this boy in a park stimming and playing with a string, and the officer asks him what he's doing, and the little boy actually is advocating for himself, which is something that's really hard to do for somebody on the spectrum. Yeah, and he told the officer that he was stimming, and the officer didn't believe that and thought that the string was something that might have been laced with drugs or playing with drugs, and it ended up being a use of force situation. Where the officer ended up having to use force and take the young man down and cause some injuries. And myself, being in law enforcement as long as I have been, I've taught defensive tactics, I've taught new recruits, I've taught in service, and we're always teaching our officers that officer safety is paramount. And everything that we would teach this officer that he didn't apply it wrong. He just didn't have enough training to understand what autism was. And that's when we really started sitting there thinking, like, we have to make this safe for everybody.
Because he didn't know the terminology. I mean, he said he was stemming, and the officer didn't know what that was.
Correct.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for me as an officer, even in our community that we live in and the community that I work for, my biggest fear was someone calling 911 when our son is overstimulated and out in the park, and how would they respond?
And oh my God, what do we do?
And what do we do?
What happens?
Yeah. So the key for us is making sure that we can provide that information, those tools of what is stimming, some of those the key terminology.
Just the basic terminology of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we can really empower our first responders with more knowledge. So when they go to those calls for service, they know, they have that.
Well, and I think that that's so important to pinpoint to our listeners today. A lot of times with Drayson, he will describe symptoms, but he doesn't say, I have autism, right? It's not something that is common for him to just outwardly say, but he'll say stemming or use some more of the other terminology, because, and I think that that's happened with a lot of kids. They know that they have autism, but they don't say, I have autism. And even then, a lot of people still are learning about what autism is. I mean, I get approached all the time, like, well, what is that? What is it exactly? Mm-hmm. So I think that you guys bring up a really interesting point. And we, we've had this discussion, we know the officer technically did not do anything wrong. Mm-hmm. And I think it's just, that's where it's also heartbreaking, right?
Yes.
Right.
Because we want to be able to provide to our autism community, but our first responders also need a little bit of love and care as well, I feel like.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, is we don't want to shame our first responders.
Yeah.
That's not at all what this is about, because, that officer didn't know, what he was doing in that call for service. And so that's why we want to make sure that we're doing better.
We're doing better, yeah.
Yeah.
So
I've done some research, sorry, and
No, you're okay.
there's no standardized training in the nation or even in the States
Really?
on autism training for first responders.
Really?
So we have things that we are standardized that we have to complete: firearms, driving, defensive tactics, and dealing with emotionally disturbed, as they sometimes call it in the lesson plans, but nothing on autism. And when I was doing my research, they were polling officers throughout the nation saying, hey, if you had autism training, how do you think you would respond? And, some of them were like, I'm not sure. And then they would give them little bits of training here and there. And officers were like, I already feel 100 times more confident when I just know what stimming means.
Right.
And that's where the bridging the gap is. Like, if we're giving these officers and these firefighters that want this training, this information, they're just going to feel more confident in that. And there's going to be less use of force, less paralytics issued on medical calls for service, and we're going to provide best-in-class service.
Right. And that's amazing. And I think that it's important to understand why first responders, need this training. So can you guys define why you feel it's so important for them to be educated on this topic and how it's going to benefit them in the community that they serve?
So I can tell you, with my home agency, we've done some training, we've provided some information out there, and automatically officers are already not jumping to the conclusion, because we're going to go to the types of calls that we're dispatched to. And if somebody's watching something happen and they say, I see an individual and they look suspicious, I think they're on drugs, we're going to a call of a person on drugs.
Right.
But if they have this training and we're going to it, we're going to go there. We're going to understand that now autism, sometimes mannerisms when they're overstimulated, gets misinterpreted by the general public as impairment or suspicious or defiant behavior. Okay. These officers are going to show up and they're going to be more patient. They're going to understand we don't have to rush in to do these things. We have to make sure the scene is safe, but we don't have to go hands-on. And we're going to ask better questions. We're not going to ask leading questions. We're going to ask open-ended questions, and just a way to communicate more effectively, and then find a way to provide a resource.
Right.
The resource isn't, this isn't a criminal matter, I'm going to leave, or this is a criminal matter, I need to arrest you. It is, how do we provide the right resource to families or individuals when they're in a time of crisis?
Right. Which I think is something, again, that we don't think about as parents, that have special needs kids. I mean, I know even initially, like I said, us being a first responder family too, it didn't occur to me right away that what do I do if he's in a crisis situation and I'm not here? I can't be his voice, or I can't delegate for him, or what if, and I think then you start spiraling a little bit in terms of, okay, well, how can we help our first responders? Because, especially firefighters and police officers, they're the first ones that are usually on the scene, right?
Yes.
And a lot of your training, you're hoping to expand into also emergency room. Is that correct?
Yes. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, emergency room, the classroom, education.
Event security for sporting events. There's no reason that a family has somebody that is neurodivergent that they can't go and enjoy a sporting event and have an opportunity, if they do get overstimulated, to back off. And maybe if somebody, calls security over, they're trained, and they realize this person didn't have too much to drink at a baseball game. They're overstimulated, they need a few minutes, and they find a way to provide the services to them, right? It's just about making a more inclusive community.
More inclusive, yeah.
Well, yeah, because, our autism community, we want them to feel safe going out into the community anywhere. They go to the grocery store, they go, everywhere. And so we want them to be able to feel comfortable wherever they go.
We want to be able to cultivate those the independence that that everyone wants, right?
Yes.
And I think that that's something too that, like Drayson is now entering preteen. So excited about that.
It's next level.
Right, yeah. I'm like, oh boy, I just buckling up for this one.
We've been there.
Yeah. So I think, though, what I've seen in Drayson is that, I've always been that advocate, that voice, that provider for him. But now I'm noticing, like, he's wanting more of his own independence. He's wanting more freedom, just like any other normal child his age.
Right.
And but there is another level that I feel like I'm having to navigate because I want him to be able to have all those things. I want him to feel safe and to go out into the community. And it does. It's a scary feeling, and I know you guys have felt that way too. You know, Preston's driving now, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, he's driving. Yeah, so
not consistently, but he is.
I mean, that's just in general. My oldest now is growing out of the house, but still, he would take go out, and I would be nervous just about him driving.
Right.
I feel though like it's another level.
Oh yeah.
Knowing that Drayson is, also on the spectrum.
Yeah.
And if he were to get pulled over, would he know how to interact with that officer, and would that officer be able to understand him as well?
Well, that's another thing for us.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
And they don't want that scarlet letter, and they don't always want to be recognized for that, and that's hard too, and you can't look at them and just know, oh, they have autism, and so that's hard too because they don't always know how to communicate. I have autism, and they don't always want to communicate I have autism. They don't want to be recognized for that.
Drayson's very nonverbal. Like, he will just completely, and it's not, and I think it's almost just a mechanism in him. Like, I don't know this person.
Yeah.
That's the other thing, is if you're not in the tree of trust with Drayson, it's like, I don't know this person, I'm not going to talk to this person, or you get the standard go away.
Right.
Which I'm like, you don't want to say that. Yeah, and so I think that that's also, I feel a sense of responsibility to try to figure out how to educate him as well, to know how to have those interactions too. So I don't feel like, I feel like it's a two-way street.
Absolutely.
It
right.
is.
And that's the thing. I mean, you meet one person on the spectrum, you've only met one person on the spectrum. They're all so unique. And so that's hard too, and so you can't just say, okay, tell me everything about, autism. Well, you're only going to learn about one person, that's on the spectrum. And so it's very hard. So you can try to learn, as many, traits as possible, but it's going to be hard because I can tell you as much as I can about my son, and what's unique to him. But it's
difficult. Well, and you can't be there for every single interaction as they get older. That's, I think that's what I'm starting to realize, is that Drayson's getting older, and I can't be there for every single interaction, like, because he does want the freedom. He does want the independence. He does, I do see him wanting to grow and flourish. Right. So it's just, it's gut wrenching for me. I'm trying not to be a control freak about it, but it's one of those things where you feel like you've got to also let go of that process, and let them try to figure it out.
Right.
That's part of the reason we chose a name and had acceptance in there when Autumn did it, because all Preston wants to do is be accepted.
Yeah.
And that's
Absolutely.
what every
and I think
autistic
that's such
kid
a great, the verbiage is amazing because it's true. I think that, and I think people in general just want to be accepted, right?
Absolutely.
So, and I think that that's really, really awesome. So, Preston, did he help you pick the name?
He didn't, but no. He's pretty humble, actually. But when we told him about the name, he smiled, he beamed, and he's very proud of what we're doing. And I think he definitely. I get emotional just thinking about it, but it means something to him. And sorry.
It's okay. And it means something to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It means something to our whole family. Our youngest is so proud. And he advocates for his little brother so much. And it matters to him too.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's okay. You're fine.
And so,
trust me, I've cried plenty of times on this show. Don't worry. Like, it's normal.
Sorry.
It's like, get the tissue out, folks. Yeah, no, you're fine.
Sorry.
No, you're
but
okay.
I mean, this mission, this whole thing, just it really does matter. It matters to our family, but it doesn't just matter to our family. I believe it matters, as a whole.
As a whole. Well, and you mentioned Parker, your youngest, and we haven't spoken about Parker, and I can only speak from my own observation about what a fantastic kid he is as well, and to support his older brother in a way that is, I mean, truly. I do believe, too, that you're creating also another generation of people to become understanding, even at Parker's age. Because Parker's, is he 12?
He's 12.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So he's Drayson's age. And I think, it's also creating another generation of acceptance.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think absolutely. I mean, it starts at such a young age. And I think, just teaching even the youngest, kids to just see people for who they are and their character and
to stay open-minded too. 100%. I think sometimes we try to put everyone in that box or they fit this mold and I think that's really difficult sometimes. So tell me a little bit about I want our listeners to understand what type of support you guys really need and what what the average cost is to train a first responder. And I realize right now your home base, we're in Arizona, so that's where home base is for Preston's Pursuit for Acceptance. But this is something that you're planning on carrying nationwide, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Our hope is absolutely to go nationwide. I mean, we really want to, spread the word. We hope for people to spread the word on this and just help us to, get the word out. And we want to go to every agency if we can. We really want to empower, all of our first responders with this. And, it costs approximately $50 and a first responder to train.
Okay.
There's over 117,000 police and fire departments in the United States alone.
Wow.
And, $50 per student to get that training. I can tell you that most law enforcement training I go to is anywhere between $300 to, $2,000 for one-day training. And we want to make it reasonable so the law enforcement agency can basically budget for it, pay for it, find a grant for it, get sponsorship for it, whatever it be, or donations, so we can get the training out, because it's about getting the training out there and doing those things, and also we want to create scholarships, so if a first responder interacts with a family that they're not able to get some of the benefits through their insurance or whatever, we can help them out with the first responders, as well as Autumn brought up, we have families too. And I can tell you that when we were talking to our fire department in Arizona, one of our agencies, we were doing a class and there was a brand new fire recruit. And as we were just giving some symptoms and some mannerisms, he walked up to us during a break and he was pale white. And he's like, "You just described my 2-year-old son. What do I do?" Yeah.
And we've noticed that too a lot. We've taken Drayson in for, to interact with the new recruits. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because you really don't know what you're going to get. Like we've had a couple really good interactions, and then we had one where he went running for the door. Mm-hmm. And when we were trying to, this is the example, they'll run, and we've had that happen to us as well, where, I think I've seen my nephew do that, or I have a 3-year-old son that is exhibiting that behavior. Yeah. And so it's not, and that's the thing, is that it's not just, it affects everyone, right? First responder or not, it affects everyone. But it's interesting that that's also coming to light, because I think that's something that when you get engrossed in that type of training, I don't think it's something that you would readily look at potentially. Does that kind of make sense what I'm saying?
No, it absolutely does.
And that's why the next level for us in our training, it's not just about training. We also want to ensure that we're providing resources.
Right.
Because we are finding so often that when we're encountering our first responders, that they are so desperate for the help, the resources, information, because some of them are at the very beginning of this journey.
Yeah.
And so, so yes, we want to make sure that we're part of that support system for them, because we get it. We've been there, and it is hard. And so we want to make sure that we're there for them and we can be a part of that for them.
And I would think it would feel empowering for a lot of first responders to be able to give those resources, right? I
Absolutely.
mean, in my previous life when I was in healthcare, I loved the fact that I could provide that to my clients or my patients, that I could say, you know, try this resource, or you could go here. And I think that that's really great, because I think it just empowers that first responder more.
It does. And when families call us, they're not calling us to tell us about a great thing that happened. They're calling us when they're in a crisis.
Right.
Yeah.
And just because we came and maybe diffused that crisis, it doesn't mean that it's going to stop, right? And so if we can leave and empower the families with something to help themselves understand, much like we've all had to learn through our navigation, and we give them a tool or a resource, then they're more willing and able to get out there and kind of take it for themselves. And, and they don't have to call 911 all the time.
Right.
They learn how to do this the right way.
Right.
And they have a network that they're creating as well, and they create their own support systems.
Right. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I really commend you guys for all the hard work you've done. I know I'm biased because I've been behind the scenes,
Yes.
but this has really been quite the. You guys are really taking on a big thing, and I think that it's very profound what you guys are doing. So
Thank you.
I really do appreciate you guys on so many levels.
Thank you.
We are going to continue this conversation next week, but this concludes our episode for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate all of you. If you have any questions, comments, or even a show topic that you'd like to hear about, please feel free to send me an email at info@piecesformypuzzle.com. Don't forget to like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram if you haven't already, or feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel at Pieces for My Puzzle. Thanks again for tuning in. Keep working on your puzzle, and remember, you don't have to have it all solved in a day. Take care.